The dust storm hit Miller's Valley on the 3rd day of August in 1882, turning the afternoon sky the color of old blood and stealing precious moisture from soil that was already crying out for rain. Sarah Hendricks stood at the edge of what should have been a thriving wheat field, watching the wind tear through the stalks that had somehow managed to survive the drought. She was 24 years old, a widow of 8 months, and she could feel the weight of impossible choices pressing down on her shoulders like the oppressive heat that had settled over this corner of Montana territory. The farm her husband Thomas had worked so hard to establish was dying, and she did not know if she had the strength or the knowledge to save it alone. She wiped sweat from her forehead with the back of her hand, leaving a streak of dirt across her sun-browned skin. Her dark hair, once carefully pinned each morning, now hung in a loose braid down her back. Practical rather than pretty. There was no one to impress anymore. No one to care whether she looked like a proper lady or a field hand. The only thing that mattered was whether she could bring in enough of a harvest to pay the banknote that was coming due in 6 weeks. The sound of hoofbeats made her turn, and she shaded her eyes against the glare to see a rider approaching from the direction of the Garrett property that bordered her land to the west. As the figure drew closer, she recognized Cole Garrett, her neighbor, sitting tall in the saddle on a bay gelding that looked as tired as everything else in this parched valley. Cole was 27, a cowboy who had saved enough money working cattle drives to buy his own spread 3 years ago. Sarah had seen him at community gatherings before Thomas died, had noticed the way his gray eyes seemed to take in everything without judgment, the way his rare smiles transformed his weather-beaten face into something unexpectedly handsome. But she had been a married woman then, and he had been nothing more than a neighbor who tipped his hat politely when their paths crossed. He reined in his horse a respectful distance away and dismounted, holding his hat in his hands. The wind immediately caught his dark brown hair, and he had to squint against the dust. "Mrs. Hendricks," he said, his voice carrying clearly despite the wind, "I hope you will forgive the intrusion. I was checking my fence line and saw you out here. Thought I might offer some help if you need it." Sarah felt her spine stiffen with automatic pride. She had been accepting charity for months now, casseroles from church ladies, offers of assistance from men who looked at her with either pity or calculation in their eyes. She was tired of being the object of sympathy, tired of feeling like she could not manage on her own. "I appreciate the offer, Mr. Garrett, but I am managing fine," she said, knowing even as the words left her mouth that they were a lie visible to anyone with eyes to see. Cole did not contradict her directly, but she saw his gaze sweep across the struggling wheat, the sagging fence posts in the distance, the barn with its missing shingles. When he looked back at her, there was understanding in his expression rather than pity. "I have no doubt you have been working yourself to the bone, ma'am," he said quietly, "but this drought is making things hard on everyone. My own cattle are getting thin, and I have been hauling water from the creek twice a day just to keep them alive. I was thinking that if you needed an extra pair of hands to help shore up your irrigation ditches or harvest what wheat you can salvage, I would be glad to help. Neighborly assistance, nothing more." Sarah wanted to refuse again, but the words caught in her throat. She was so tired. Tired of waking before dawn to work until long past sunset. Tired of falling into bed with her muscles screaming and her hands raw with blisters. Tired of lying awake in the darkness, calculating and recalculating numbers that never added up to enough. "I cannot pay you," she said finally, the admission feeling like defeat. "Did not ask for payment," Cole replied, "but if it makes you feel better about accepting the help, you could teach me how to make those preserves your husband used to bring to the harvest festival. My sister's getting married next spring, and I would like to give her something besides another set of spurs." Despite everything, Sarah felt a smile tug at the corner of her mouth. The idea of this lean, weathered cowboy standing over a pot of jam was absurd enough to be charming. "You really want to learn how to make preserves?" she asked skeptically. "I really want to help you save your harvest," Cole said, meeting her eyes directly. "And I figured offering something in return might make it easier for you to say yes." Sarah studied him for a long moment. There was no pity in his face, No suggestion that she was a helpless woman in need of rescue. He was simply offering help the way neighbors did in this hard country, where survival often depended on people supporting each other through difficult times. "All right," she said finally. "Thank you, Mr. Garrett. I would appreciate the help." "Cole," he said, settling his hat back on his head, "if we are going to be working together, might as well use first names. And you can start by showing me what you think needs doing first." They spent the rest of that afternoon walking her property, with Sarah pointing out the irrigation ditches that needed clearing, the wheat that was ready for harvesting, the 100 small repairs that had piled up over the months since Thomas died. Cole listened carefully, occasionally asking questions that showed he understood farming better than she would have expected from a man who made his living with cattle. As the sun began to sink toward the mountains in the west, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple that were beautiful despite the drought, Cole swung back into his saddle. "I will be over tomorrow morning early," he said. "We should start on those ditches first, see if we can direct more water to the wheat that still has a chance." "Cole," Sarah said, the name feeling strange on her tongue after months of speaking to almost no one. "Why are you doing this?" He was quiet for a moment, looking out across the valley that was spread below them, the patchwork of farms and ranches that made up their small community. "Because Thomas was a good man who helped me repair my barn roof last spring when I threw my shoulder out," he said finally. "Because you deserve a fair chance to keep what you and he built together. And because this valley is a better place when good people can make a life here." He touched the brim of his hat in farewell and rode off into the gathering dusk, leaving Sarah standing alone with something unfamiliar stirring in her chest. It took her a moment to recognize the feeling as hope. True to his word, Cole appeared at her door just after sunrise the next morning carrying 2 shovels and a pickaxe. Sarah had been up for an hour already, feeding her chickens and her milk cow, the daily chores that could not be neglected no matter what other work needed doing. They worked side by side in the ditches as the day grew hot, clearing debris and digging out sections that had collapsed. It was brutal work, made worse by the heat and the knowledge that they were fighting against odds that grew longer with each rainless day. But Cole worked with steady determination, and Sarah found herself matching his pace, grateful to have someone sharing the burden. By mid-morning, they had restored flow to the northern section of her wheat field, and Sarah could see the parched soil drinking in the water with desperate thirst. It was not enough to save everything, but it might be enough to save some of it. They broke for lunch in the shade of her porch, and Sarah brought out bread and cold chicken and water drawn from her well, which was running lower than she had liked to think about. Cole ate with the efficient hunger of a man who worked hard for his living, and they talked about neutral things like the weather and local news. The Hendersons down the valley were expecting their 4th child. The railroad was supposedly planning to extend a line that might come within 20 miles of Miller's Valley, which could mean better prices for cattle and wheat if it actually happened. "You ever think about selling?" Cole asked as they prepared to return to work. "Moving back east, maybe, where things are easier?" Sarah shook her head firmly. "Thomas and I came out here because we wanted to build something that was ours. His family back in Ohio never thought he would amount to anything, and he was determined to prove them wrong. I cannot just abandon that dream because things got hard. Even if it means working yourself into an early grave." "If that is what it takes," Sarah said, meeting his eyes. "This is my home now. I do not have anywhere else to go." Something in Cole's expression shifted, a respect that had not quite been there before. "Then I guess we better make sure you have a harvest to bring in." They worked together through the afternoon until the heat became too oppressive to continue safely. Cole promised to return the next day, and the day after that, establishing a pattern that continued through the next 2 weeks. Each morning he would arrive as the sun cleared the horizon, and they would work until the worst heat of the day forced them to stop. Sometimes they labored in companionable silence. Other times they talked, sharing stories about their lives in the careful way of people who were becoming friends. Sarah learned that Cole had grown up in Texas, the youngest of 5 children in a family that scraped by on the edge of poverty. He had gone on his first cattle drive at 16, lying about his age to get hired, and had spent nearly a decade moving herds north before he saved enough to start his own place. He had never married, though he skirted around the topic in a way that made Sarah suspect there was a story there he was not quite ready to share. Cole learned that Sarah had been a school teacher in St. Louis before she met Thomas at her sister's wedding. He had swept her off her feet with talk of Montana territory, of wide open spaces, and the chance to build a life together far from the crowded, sooty city. She had imagined something romantic, like the adventure novels she used to read, and the reality had been so much harder than anything she could have prepared for, but she had never regretted coming west. Even after Thomas was kicked by a horse and died 3 days later from his injuries, leaving her alone in a place that suddenly felt vast and hostile. "Do you ever get lonely out here?" Sarah asked one day as they were taking a water break. The question was perhaps too personal, but the growing ease between them made her brave. Cole was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the mountains in the distance. "Every single day," he said finally. "I thought owning my own place would be enough, but a ranch is not much of a home when there is no one to share it with. I keep thinking I should do something about that, but—" He trailed off, shaking his head. "But what?" Sarah prompted gently. "But I suppose I have not met anyone who made me want to risk it," he said, glancing at her with an expression she could not quite read. "Marriage is a gamble in this country. If you choose wrong, you are both stuck being miserable. I would rather be lonely than trapped." Sarah understood that sentiment better than she might have a year ago. She and Thomas had loved each other, but it had not been the grand passion she had imagined as a girl reading romantic poetry. It had been a practical partnership, affection and respect and shared goals. She had mourned him deeply when he died, but she could not honestly say her heart had been shattered. Sometimes she felt guilty about that, as if she was somehow failing in her duty as a widow. As the days passed and the harvest grew closer, Sarah became increasingly aware of Cole in ways that had nothing to do with his usefulness as a farmhand. She noticed the way his shoulders moved beneath his shirt when he swung the scythe, the sound of his laugh when she told a particularly absurd story about one of her students back in St. Louis, the careful gentleness of his hands when he helped her splice a broken fence wire, his calloused fingers brushing against hers for just a moment. She told herself it was simply loneliness, the natural result of working closely with an attractive man after months of isolation. She was a widow in mourning, even if that mourning period was technically over by the standards of society. It would be inappropriate to develop feelings for anyone, let alone a neighbor who was only helping her out of kindness. But her heart seemed uninterested in what was appropriate, and she found herself looking forward to Cole's arrival each morning with an intensity that had nothing to do with the work that needed doing. The wheat harvest began on a morning in late August, when the air was finally beginning to cool with the promise of autumn. Cole arrived with 2 additional workers he had hired from town, men Sarah vaguely recognized from church. She started to protest that she could not afford to pay them, but Cole cut her off. "They are working for me, helping both our places," he said in a tone that brooked no argument. "You and I will work your field, they will work mine, and then we will all work together to finish both harvests. That way neither of us falls behind." It was a fiction that allowed Sarah to keep her pride while accepting help she desperately needed, and she was grateful for his tact. The 4 of them worked from dawn until well past dark, cutting and bundling wheat, loading wagons, hauling the grain to Sarah's barn where it would be threshed and stored. It was back-breaking work that left Sarah so exhausted she could barely drag herself to bed each night, but there was a satisfaction in it too. They were bringing in a harvest, proof that all her months of struggle had not been for nothing. On the 3rd day of harvesting, as Sarah and Cole worked side by side cutting wheat, she became aware of someone watching them from the road. She straightened, shading her eyes, and felt her stomach drop when she recognized Vernon Pritchard, the banker from town sitting astride a gray mare. Pritchard was a soft man in his 50s who dressed too fine for Montana territory and made no secret of his opinion that women had no business trying to run farms. He had made Sarah's life difficult since Thomas died, questioning every payment, suggesting repeatedly that she should sell to one of the larger ranchers who was consolidating property in the valley. "Mrs. Hendricks," he called out, not bothering to dismount. I was passing by and thought I should check on the property. The note is due in 3 weeks, as I'm sure you recall." "I recall perfectly well, Mr. Pritchard," Sarah said, walking toward the fence line with Cole following a few steps behind. "As you can see, we are bringing in the harvest now. I will have your payment on time." Pritchard's gaze swept dismissively over the field, then landed on Cole with an expression of distaste. "I see you have acquired help. Is this a new husband I should know about? Or perhaps just hired labor you cannot afford?" Sarah felt her cheeks burn with anger and embarrassment. But before she could respond, Cole stepped forward. "I am Cole Garrett, her neighbor to the west," he said, his voice level but with an edge of steel underneath. "I have been helping Mrs. Hendricks with some work in exchange for her teaching me some skills I want to learn. Nothing improper about neighbors helping each other in hard times, which I'm sure you understand, being such a pillar of the community and all." The last part was delivered with just enough politeness to avoid being an outright insult, but the implication was clear. Pritchard's face reddened. "I am simply looking out for the bank's interests," he said stiffly. "This property represents a significant investment, and we need assurance that our loan will be repaid." "It will be," Sarah said firmly. "I have never missed a payment, Mr. Pritchard, and I do not intend to start now. Was there anything else you needed?" Pritchard looked like he wanted to say more, but with Cole standing there watching him with those steady gray eyes, he seemed to think better of it. "Just wanted to check on things. I will expect to see you in my office on the 15th of September with the full payment." He wheeled his horse around and rode off, leaving dust hanging in the still air. Sarah stood rigid, her hands clenched into fists at her sides, until Cole gently touched her elbow. "Are you all right?" he asked quietly. "I hate that man," Sarah said, surprised by the vehemence in her own voice. "He has been trying to force me to sell since the week after Thomas's funeral. I think he has a deal worked out with Clayton Ross to buy up the smaller properties in the valley." Clayton Ross was the largest rancher in the area, a man whose ambition was matched only by his ruthlessness. Sarah had heard rumors that several families who sold their farms to Ross had done so under pressure, though nothing could be proven. "How much do you need for the payment?" Cole asked. Sarah shook her head. "I cannot ask you for money, Cole. You have already done too much." "I am not offering a loan," he said. "I am asking a question. How much do you need, and how much will you make from the harvest?" Sarah hesitated, then gave him the numbers. She had done the calculations so many times she had them memorized. If the harvest was good and she could get a fair price at the grain elevator, she would be about $40 short. It might as well have been $400 for all the chance she had of finding that money in 3 weeks. "I will figure something out," she said, trying to sound more confident than she felt. "Maybe I can sell some chickens or take in sewing work, or you could let me buy that section of pasture on your northeast corner," Cole said, "the piece that borders my land. It is not much good for wheat, but it would give my cattle more range, and I have been thinking about expanding anyway. I would pay you a fair price, more than enough to cover what you need." Sarah stared at him. "You want to buy part of my land?" "Only if you're willing to sell," Cole said. "I know Thomas put his heart into this place, and I'm not trying to take advantage of you. But that pasture would be useful to me, and it would solve your immediate problem. Then you could focus on making next year's crop even better instead of worrying about keeping the bank off your back." It was a lifeline, and Sarah knew she should take it. But selling off even a piece of the farm felt like failure, like she was giving up on the dream she and Thomas had shared. "Let me think about it," she said finally. Cole nodded. "Of course. The offer stands whenever you're ready. Now we should probably get back to work before we lose the light." They returned to the wheat field, but Sarah's mind was churning with the decision she faced. By the time the sun set and Cole headed home, she still had not reached a conclusion. That night, Sarah sat at her kitchen table with Thomas's account book spread before her, going over the numbers yet again as if they might somehow change. The house was quiet except for the ticking of the clock on the mantel and the occasional creak of wood settling. She had lit only one lamp to conserve kerosene, and the circle of light seemed small and fragile against the darkness pressing in from all sides. She thought about Thomas, about the dreams they had shared when they first arrived in Montana Territory. He had been so sure they could make a success of this place, so confident in their ability to build something lasting. But Thomas had never had to face a drought like this one, had never had to figure out how to survive alone when everything seemed to be falling apart. Sarah closed the account books and rested her head in her hands. She was so tired of being strong, of making impossible decisions, of carrying the weight of the farm on her shoulders. For just a moment, she let herself imagine what it would be like to have someone to share that burden with again. Not just a helpful neighbor, but a true partner who would stand beside her through whatever challenges came. An image of Cole rose unbidden in her mind, the way he had stood up to Pritchard without hesitation, the quiet confidence in his offer to buy the pasture. He had never once made her feel weak or incapable, had never suggested she was foolish for trying to keep the farm. He simply offered help when she needed it and respected her right to make her own choices. Sarah lifted her head and looked around the kitchen, at the curtains she had sewn herself, the shelves Thomas had built, the marks on the door frame where they had planned to someday measure the heights of children who never came. This house held memories both sweet and sad, but it was still just a house. The land was what mattered, the ability to support herself and build a future, whatever that future might hold. She made her decision then, and when Cole arrived the next morning, she told him she would sell him the northeast pasture at a fair price. The relief in his eyes told her he had been genuinely worried about how she would manage, and something warm unfurled in her chest at the realization that he cared. The harvest continued through the next week, and Sarah found herself working side by side with Cole more than ever. The two hired men had returned to their own work, but Cole kept coming every morning, helping her finish cutting and hauling the wheat, then working late into the evenings to thresh the grain. They fell into an easy rhythm, anticipating each other's movements, communicating as much through gestures and glances as through words. One evening as they were finishing up, with the western sky painted in brilliant shades of crimson and gold, Cole paused in the barn doorway and looked back at Sarah. She was covered in chaff and dust, her hair escaping its braid, her face flushed with exertion, and she must have looked a complete mess. But the expression in his eyes made her breath catch. "Sarah," he said, and it was the first time he had used her given name without the Mrs. before it. "I want to tell you something, and I need you to know I am not saying it to make you feel obligated or to take advantage of your situation." Sarah's heart began to beat faster. "All right." Cole took off his hat and turned it in his hands, suddenly looking uncertain in a way she had never seen from him before. "These past few weeks, working with you, getting to know you better, it has meant more to me than I know how to put into words. You are the strongest, most determined person I have ever met, and I admire the hell out of you for fighting so hard to keep what is yours, but it is more than admiration. I have developed feelings for you, Sarah, real feelings that go beyond neighborly concern, and I needed you to know that, even though I understand if you cannot or do not want to hear it." Sarah stood frozen, chaff drifting down around her in the golden light, her mind racing. She should tell him it was too soon, that she was still in mourning, that she could not possibly think about such things when her whole world was balanced on a knife's edge. But the truth was that she had developed feelings for him too, had been trying to deny them to herself because they seemed impossible given everything else she was dealing with. "Cole," she said softly, "I do not know what to say." "You do not have to say anything," he replied quickly. "I just wanted you to know where I stand. If you want me to finish helping with the harvest and then stay away, I will respect that. If you want to keep things as they have been, neighbors and friends, that is fine too. I just could not keep it to myself any longer." Sarah walked toward him slowly, her boots scuffing through the chaff scattered on the barn floor. When she reached him, she looked up into his weathered face at the gray eyes that had watched her with such kindness and respect over the past weeks. "I have been telling myself I should not feel anything for you," she said honestly, "that it is too soon after Thomas, that I should be focused on saving the farm, that developing feelings for anyone right now is foolish and impractical. But I am tired of being practical, Cole. I am tired of denying myself even the possibility of happiness because of what other people might think or because the timing is not perfect." "What are you saying?" Cole asked, his voice rough with hope and uncertainty. "I am saying that I have feelings for you too," Sarah said. "I am saying that these past weeks have been the happiest I have been since Thomas died. And it is not just because you have been helping with the work. It is because I have enjoyed your company, your conversation, your presence in my life. I am saying that I would like to see where this might lead, if you are willing to be patient with me while I figure things out." Cole's face broke into a smile that transformed him, making him look younger and almost carefree. He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted, and cupped her face gently in his work-roughened hand. "I can be patient," he said. "I have waited 27 years to feel this way about someone. I can wait a little longer to do things right." He leaned down and kissed her, soft and careful, a question rather than a demand. Sarah rose on her toes and kissed him back, letting herself feel the warmth and strength of him, the promise of something new beginning amidst all the struggle and loss. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were breathing hard, and Sarah felt like she was standing on the edge of something vast and terrifying and wonderful all at once. "We should probably take this slow," she said, trying to be sensible even as her heart raced. "People will talk if we are too open about this, and I still have the farm to think about and the payment to make." "We will take it as slow as you need," Cole agreed. "But Sarah, I want you to know that I am serious about this, about you. When I commit to something, I commit all the way. So if you have any doubts, tell me now." Sarah thought about it, really thought about it, examining her feelings with the same careful attention she gave to her account books. What she felt for Cole was different from what she had felt for Thomas. It was fiercer, more immediate, like standing too close to a fire. It scared her a little, but it also made her feel alive in a way she had almost forgotten was possible. "I do not have doubts," she said. "I have fears, because I know how much it hurts to lose someone. But I am willing to take that risk if you are." "I am," Cole said firmly. "Now let us finish this harvest and get you ready to thumb your nose at that banker when you make your payment on time." They worked together through the final days of the harvest, and Sarah found herself smiling more than she had in months. Cole had not been exaggerating when he said he committed fully to things. He was attentive without being overbearing, affectionate in small ways that would not cause gossip, constantly finding excuses to touch her hand or stand close enough that their shoulders brushed. When they talked, he listened with his whole attention, asking questions about her life before Montana Territory, about her dreams for the future, about 100 small things that made her feel seen and valued. On the day before she was due to make her payment to the bank, Cole helped her load the last of her wheat onto a wagon to take to the grain elevator in town. The harvest had been smaller than she hoped, but better than she feared. And with the money from selling him the pasture, she would have enough to make the payment with a little left over to see her through the winter. "I will drive you into town tomorrow," Cole said as they secured the final bag of grain. "Pritchard might try to give you trouble, and I want to be there to make sure he does not cheat you on the payment." "You do not have to do that," Sarah protested, though she was secretly relieved at the offer. The thought of facing Pritchard alone made her stomach churn with anxiety. "I know I do not have to," Cole said. "I want to. Besides, I need to file the deed for the pasture at the land office, so I have business in town anyway." They set out early the next morning in Sarah's wagon, with Cole driving and Sarah sitting beside him in her best dress, the one she had worn to church before she stopped going because she could not bear the pitying looks and whispered conversations. The dress was a bit loose now, after months of hard work and irregular meals, but it was still respectable. The town of Miller's Crossing was 20 miles from Sarah's farm, a collection of wooden buildings clustered around a main street that turned to mud when it rained and dust when it did not. It boasted a general store, a saloon, a church, a land office, and Pritchard's bank, along with a handful of other businesses and houses. It was not much, but it was the center of commerce for the scattered ranches and farms in the valley. They stopped first at the grain elevator, where Sarah sold her wheat for a price that was lower than she would have liked, but fair given the drought. The cash felt heavy in her reticule as they walked down the street toward the bank, and she found herself gripping it tightly as if Pritchard might somehow steal it away before she could make her payment. The banker's face fell when Sarah walked into his office and placed the full amount of her payment on his desk, along with the paperwork showing the sale of the pasture to Cole. He had clearly been hoping she would fail, and his disappointment was almost comical. "Everything is in order, I trust," Sarah said sweetly, enjoying his discomfort more than she probably should. Pritchard counted the money twice, checking the bills as if hoping to find them counterfeit. When he could not find any excuse to reject the payment, he wrote out a receipt with poor grace. "You have bought yourself another year, Mrs. Hendricks," he said sourly. "Let us hope next year's harvest is better, or you may not be so fortunate." "Fortune has nothing to do with it," Cole said from his position leaning against the wall. "Sarah works harder than any 3 men I know. She'll make next year's harvest just fine." Pritchard's eyes narrowed. "You seem quite invested in Mrs. Hendricks's affairs, Mr. Garrett. I hope your interest is purely neighborly." "My interests are none of your concern," Cole said, straightening up to his full height. "As long as Sarah makes her payments on time, which she just did, you have no reason to question anything about her or who chooses to help her." The 2 men stared at each other for a long moment, and Sarah could feel the tension crackling in the air. Finally, Pritchard looked away, making a show of filing the receipt. "Good day to you both," he said dismissively. Outside the bank, Sarah let out a breath she had not realized she was holding. "Thank you for being there. I do not think I could have faced him alone." "You are stronger than you think," Cole said, offering her his arm as they walked back toward the wagon. "But I'm glad I could be there anyway." They had lunch at the hotel restaurant, a rare extravagance that Sarah permitted herself because the relief of making the payment had left her almost giddy. Sitting across from Cole in the clean, bright dining room, she could almost imagine they were a normal couple courting in a normal way, without the weight of death and debt and drought hanging over them. "What are you thinking about, Wah?" Cole asked, watching her with a small smile. "That this feels nice," Sarah said honestly. "Normal, like maybe there could be a future beyond just surviving one crisis after another." "There can be," Cole said, reaching across the table to take her hand. "Sarah, I know we said we would take things slow, and I meant that. But I want you to know what my intentions are. I want to court you properly. I want to stand beside you and help you build that farm into something prosperous. And if you will have me, I want to marry you and spend the rest of my life making sure you never have to face anything alone again." Sarah's breath caught. It was too fast, her practical mind insisted. They had known each other for less than 2 months, but her heart knew what it wanted. And it wanted this man who had appeared in her life when she needed someone most and had never once made her feel like a burden. "Yes," she said, the word escaping before she could think better of it. "Yes, I want all of that too." Cole's smile could have lit up the whole valley. He raised her hand to his lips and kissed it, uncaring of who might be watching. "Then that is what we will have. We will do it right, though, a proper courtship, time for you to be sure, time for us to learn everything about each other. And when you are ready, I will marry you and spend every day proving you made the right choice." They finished their meal in a glow of happiness, making plans for the future with the tentative hope of people who were beginning to believe good things might actually be possible. Cole would continue helping Sarah with the farm work while also tending his own ranch. They would see each other as often as was proper, always with an eye to what the community might say, because Sarah's reputation was important both for her own sake and for the success of the farm. And when enough time had passed that marriage would not seem scandalously quick, they would stand before the minister and make their promises official. The ride back to the farm that evening was peaceful, with the worst heat of the day fading into a pleasant coolness. Sarah leaned against Cole's shoulder. Proper behavior be damned, and watched the stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky. For the first time in longer than she could remember, the future looked bright. The autumn months that followed were some of the happiest of Sarah's life. The harvest was stored, the payment made, and the constant pressure of impending disaster had lifted enough to let her breathe. Cole was a frequent visitor, helping her prepare the farm for winter, and they stole moments of privacy whenever they could. Kisses in the barn, and quiet conversations on the porch as the sun set. The community noticed, of course, it was impossible to keep anything private in a place as small as Miller's Valley. But most people seemed genuinely happy for Sarah, glad to see the grieving widow finding a reason to smile again. There were a few disapproving voices, people who thought she should mourn Thomas for longer, but Sarah found she did not care as much as she might have expected. She had done her grieving, had honored her late husband's memory by fighting to save the farm he built. She was entitled to her own happiness now. In late October, Cole invited her to dinner at his ranch, the first time Sarah had seen his home properly. It was a modest place, a small house he had built himself and a barn that needed some repairs, but it was neat and well-maintained, showing the pride he took in what he had accomplished. He cooked for her beef and potatoes and biscuits that were only slightly burned, and they laughed together at his lack of skill in the kitchen. "I'm afraid you will have to do most of the cooking when we are married," Cole said, scraping burned bits off a biscuit, "unless you want to live on beef jerky and coffee." "When we are married?" Sarah teased. "I do not recall accepting a formal proposal yet, Mr. Garrett." Cole set down his knife and came around the table, kneeling beside her chair in a parody of a formal proposal. "Mrs. Sarah Hendricks, would you do me the very great honor of becoming my wife, accepting my terrible cooking and my stubborn nature and my deep, abiding love for you?" Sarah laughed, then felt tears spring to her eyes at the genuine emotion in his face. "Yes, you foolish man. Yes, I will marry you." He kissed her then, long and deep, and Sarah felt desire unfurl in her belly, a heat she had not felt in longer than she cared to admit. She pulled back reluctantly, knowing that if they continued down this path, she would not want to stop. "We should wait until after the wedding," she said breathlessly. "I know," Cole agreed, though he looked as reluctant as she felt. "I want to do this right, Sarah. I want you to have no regrets and no doubts. I can wait." They set a date for a Christmas wedding, which would give them time to prepare and would be long enough after Thomas's death to avoid the worst of the gossip. Sarah spent her evening sewing a new dress, simple but pretty, cream-colored wool that would be practical for the Montana winter. Cole worked on expanding his house, adding a second bedroom for the children they both hoped to have, and improving the kitchen so Sarah would have a proper place to cook. As winter approached and the first snows began to fall on the mountains, Sarah found herself reflecting on how much her life had changed in just a few short months. She had gone from desperate and alone to happy and looking forward to the future. She had learned that she was stronger than she knew, capable of surviving things she never thought she could face, and she had found love again, a different kind of love than what she had with Thomas, but no less real. In early December, Cole helped her move the last of her livestock to his ranch, where they would be easier to care for during the winter. Her farm would sit quiet under the snow until spring, but it would still be hers, a symbol of everything she had fought for and survived. She and Cole had decided that after they married, they would work both properties, combining their resources and skills to make both places more prosperous than either could be alone. The night before their wedding, Sarah lay awake in her little house, listening to the wind howl around the corners and watching snowflakes drift past the window. Tomorrow she would become Sarah Garrett, would join her life with Cole's in a partnership she believed would last the rest of their days. She was not afraid, not anymore. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. The wedding took place in the small church in Miller's Crossing, with most of the valley community crammed into the wooden pews. It was a simple ceremony, Sarah in her new dress and Cole in his best suit, both of them speaking their vows with clear, firm voices that left no doubt about their commitment to each other. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Cole kissed her thoroughly, to the whooping approval of the cowboys in the back pews and the scandalized delight of the church ladies. The reception was held in the church hall, with food brought by neighbors and dancing to the music of a fiddler who had played at every wedding and funeral in the valley for the past 20 years. Sarah danced with her new husband, with neighbors, with the hired men who had helped bring in her harvest. She laughed and talked and accepted congratulations and felt truly happy for the first time since before Thomas died. As the evening wound down and people began to drift toward home through the softly falling snow, Cole took Sarah's hand and led her to his wagon. They rode through the winter night to his ranch, to the home that was now theirs together, and Sarah felt a sense of peace settle over her like a warm blanket. Cole carried her across the threshold despite her laughing protests and set her down gently in the parlor he had decorated with pine boughs and candles. In the flickering light, he looked at her with such love that Sarah felt her throat tighten with emotion. "I promise you, Sarah Garrett, that I will spend every day of the rest of my life making sure you know you are loved and valued," he said solemnly. "You are the strongest person I know, and I am honored that you chose to share your life with me." "I think I am the lucky one," Sarah said, reaching up to touch his face. "You came into my life when I needed someone most, and you never once made me feel weak for needing help. You saw me as a partner, as someone capable and worthy of respect. That is the greatest gift anyone has ever given me." They kissed, and this time there was no need to pull back, no need to wait. They went to the bedroom together, nervous and eager and so much in love that it filled the small house to overflowing. The winter passed peacefully, with Sarah and Cole settling into married life with surprising ease. They worked together to care for the animals, to maintain the ranch buildings, to plan for the spring planting. They talked for hours about everything and nothing, learning each other's rhythms and preferences, building the foundation of a partnership that would sustain them through whatever came. In February, Sarah realized she was pregnant. She had suspected for a few weeks, but had not wanted to say anything until she was certain. When she told Cole, he picked her up and spun her around, then immediately set her down with comical care as if she might break. "Are you happy?" she asked, suddenly uncertain. "Happy?" Cole repeated incredulously. "Sarah, I am so happy I could burst. A baby, our baby. You have made me the luckiest man in Montana Territory." He was attentive to the point of being overbearing as the pregnancy progressed, constantly trying to prevent Sarah from doing any heavy work. She had to remind him repeatedly that pregnancy was not an illness and that she was perfectly capable of managing the household and even helping with light farm work. But his concern came from love, and she could not truly be annoyed with him for caring too much. Spring arrived with a profusion of wildflowers and the promise of better weather than the previous year had delivered. The winter snows had been heavy, and the mountain streams ran full, which meant water for irrigation and grass for the cattle. Sarah and Cole planted both their properties with wheat and vegetables, and this time Sarah was not working alone, but alongside her husband, building something together. In the evenings, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the valley in shades of gold and rose, Cole would rest his hand on Sarah's growing belly and talk to their unborn child, telling stories about the ranch and the valley and the life they would build together. "This valley is better with you in it," he said one evening, and Sarah was not sure if he was talking to her or to the baby. "Both of you. You brought light back into my life when I did not even know how dark it had gotten. I am going to make sure this is the best place in the world to raise a family." Sarah leaned against him, content and at peace. "You already have," she said softly. Their son was born in late September, just as the autumn harvest was beginning. It was a long labor, and there were moments when Sarah was frightened, but Cole stayed by her side the entire time, holding her hand and offering quiet encouragement. When the baby finally arrived, red-faced and squalling, Cole looked at him with such wonder that Sarah fell in love with her husband all over again. They named him Thomas Cole Garrett, honoring both the past and the present. Little Tommy was a healthy, hungry baby who kept them both awake at night, but filled the house with a joy that Sarah had not known was possible. Watching Cole with their son, seeing the gentle competence with which he handled the tiny infant, Sarah felt her heart expand with love for both of them. The harvest that year was abundant, better than anyone had seen in 5 years. The drought had broken, and the valley was green and prosperous again. Sarah and Cole brought in more wheat than they knew what to do with, and the payment to the bank was made with money left over to invest in improvements to both properties. On a cool October evening, With Tommy sleeping in a cradle beside the fire, Sarah stood on the porch watching Cole drive the cattle in from pasture. The valley spread below them, the patchwork of farms and ranches that made up their community, the mountains rising in the distance like protective walls. This was home, truly home, in a way that nowhere else had ever been. Cole came up the porch steps and put his arms around her from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "About how different everything is from a year ago," Sarah said. "About how lost I felt then and how found I feel now. About how grateful I am that you decided to help me save my harvest." "Our harvest," Cole corrected gently. "Everything we have is ours together now, Sarah. Your struggles are my struggles. Your triumphs are my triumphs. That is what marriage means." "I know," Sarah said, turning in his arms to face him. "But I also know that I would not have survived that first year without you. You gave me hope when I had run out of it. You saw me as strong when I felt weak. You loved me when I thought I would never feel anything but grief again. So yes, it is our harvest now, but it started because you cared enough to help a neighbor in need." Cole kissed her forehead, then her nose, then her lips. "And look what I gained from that decision. A wife I love beyond measure, a son who is the light of my life, and a future that is brighter than any I could have imagined. I told you that this valley is better with you in it, Sarah. I meant that then, and I mean it even more now." The years that followed brought the normal mixture of joy and challenge that made up a life in Montana territory. There were good years and hard years, wet springs and dry summers, times of plenty, and times when they had to tighten their belts and work even harder to make ends meet. But through it all, Sarah and Cole faced everything together, their partnership growing stronger with each challenge overcome. Their family grew as well. 2 years after Tommy was born, they had a daughter they named Mary, who had her mother's dark hair and her father's gray eyes. 3 years later came another son, Daniel, who was quieter than his siblings but just as loved. The house expanded to accommodate their growing family, and the ranch prospered under their combined efforts. Sarah never forgot the dark time after Thomas died, when she had felt so alone and overwhelmed. She used that memory to guide her interactions with others in the community, always ready to offer help to neighbors who might be struggling, always willing to share what she had learned about survival and persistence. She became known as someone who could be counted on, a pillar of the community just as much as her husband. Cole's prediction came true, and the valley did become a wonderful place to raise a family. The children grew up surrounded by wide-open spaces and mountains, learning to ride and work and appreciate the beauty of the land that sustained them. They knew the stories of how their parents met, of the harvest that almost failed, of the courage it took to build a life in this hard country. On their 10th anniversary, Cole took Sarah back to the wheat field where they had worked side by side all those years ago, the place where their relationship had truly begun. It was a warm autumn day, and the wheat was tall and golden, ready for harvest. "Do you remember standing here covered in dust and sweat, looking like you wanted to murder Vernon Pritchard?" Cole asked, grinning at the memory. "I remember thinking I could not possibly manage on my own," Sarah said. "I remember being too proud to accept help, even when I desperately needed it. And I remember you offering that help in a way that let me keep my dignity." "You would have managed even without me," Cole said seriously. "You are the most stubborn, determined person I have ever met, but I am glad you did not have to do it alone." Sarah looked around at the valley that had become her home, at the ranch she and Cole had built together, at the life they had created from desperate beginnings. She thought about the scared, grieving widow she had been, and the confident, capable woman she had become. So much of that transformation was due to the man standing beside her, the man who had seen her potential even when she could not see it herself. "This valley is better with you in it," she said, echoing his words from so long ago. "You made me believe in myself again, Cole. You gave me the courage to fight for what I wanted and the strength to build something lasting. Every good thing in my life now exists because you decided to help a neighbor in need." And every good thing in my life exists because that neighbor was brave enough to accept the help and strong enough to become my partner in every sense of the word," Cole replied. He pulled her close and kissed her, right there in the wheat field where it all began. "I love you, Sarah Garrett. I loved you when you were covered in chaff and glaring at me like I was an inconvenience. I loved you when you were pregnant and emotional and insisted on doing work you should have been resting from. I love you now. And I will love you when we are old and gray and watching our grandchildren run through these same fields." "That sounds like a pretty good future to me," Sarah said, smiling up at him. They walked back to the house hand in hand, the wheat rustling softly behind them, the mountains standing eternal watch over the valley. Behind them lay years of struggle and survival. Ahead lay years of continued work, of joys and sorrows both expected and unexpected. But they would face it all together, partners and lovers and best friends, building a legacy that would endure long after they were gone. That evening, as the family gathered for dinner, Sarah looked around the table at the faces of her husband and children, at the home they had filled with love and laughter, and felt a contentment so deep it was almost painful. This life, this family, this love, it had all started with a simple act of kindness, a neighbor offering help to someone who needed it. And from that small beginning had grown something beautiful and lasting, a love story written in harvests and hard work, in sacrifice and stubbornness, in the shared determination to build something worth having. The children grew and eventually began to leave, as children do. Tommy took over management of the wheat farm, marrying a girl from town and filling Sarah's old house with his own children. Mary became a teacher, like her mother before her, and brought education to the smaller ranches scattered through the valley. Daniel followed in his father's footsteps, becoming a skilled cattleman who expanded the ranch's operations even further. Sarah and Cole grew older together, their hair turning gray, their hands becoming gnarled with arthritis, but their love remaining as strong as ever. They became grandparents, then great-grandparents, watching their family tree spread across the valley they had helped to settle and civilize. The ranch that had started as two struggling properties became one of the most successful operations in Montana, a testament to what could be accomplished through hard work, determination, and partnership. On a summer evening in their 65th year together, Sarah and Cole sat on the porch of the house they had shared for so long, watching the sun set over the valley one more time. They were in their 80s now, old and tired, but still clear-minded and glad to be together. Their great-grandchildren were playing in the yard, their laughter carrying on the warm breeze. "Do you ever regret it?" Sarah asked suddenly. "Tying yourself to a desperate widow with a failing farm instead of finding someone younger and easier?" Cole turned to look at her, his gray eyes still sharp despite his age. "Not for one single second," he said firmly. "You were never easy, Sarah Garrett, but you were always worth it. You gave me a life beyond anything I could have imagined when I was a lonely cowboy working someone else's cattle. You gave me love and family and purpose. How could I possibly regret that?" "I was just checking," Sarah said, smiling at him. "After all these years, I wanted to make sure you had not changed your mind." "Never," Cole said, taking her hand in his. Their fingers interlaced automatically, the gesture so familiar after decades of practice. "You are stuck with me, woman, for whatever time we have left." "That suits me just fine," Sarah said, leaning her head on his shoulder. They sat in comfortable silence as the sun dipped below the mountains and the stars began to appear overhead. The valley was dark except for scattered lights from the houses of their children and grandchildren, the community that had grown from the seeds they had planted so long ago. Sarah closed her eyes and let herself drift, content in the knowledge that her life had mattered, that she had built something lasting, that she had been truly loved. When she opened them again, it was morning, and Cole was still beside her, his hand warm in hers, his presence as steady and reliable as the mountains themselves. They had a few more years together, precious time that they spent surrounded by family and the land they had worked so hard to cultivate. And when the time came for them to leave that valley behind, they went peacefully, secure in the knowledge that what they had built would endure. The ranch continued through the generations, passed down through children and grandchildren who remembered the stories of Sarah the widow and Cole the cowboy, who had found each other during a desperate harvest and built an empire of love in wheat and cattle. The valley remained prosperous, the community strong, the land productive. And if sometimes on the warm autumn evenings when the wheat was tall and golden, people thought they saw two figures standing hand in hand in the fields, watching the sunset together, well, that was just the way love worked in this wild country. It endured beyond death, beyond time itself, leaving echoes that would resonate through the valley for as long as the mountains stood watch over the land below. The story of Sarah and Cole became legend in Miller's Valley, told and retold by the generations that followed. It was a story about courage and persistence, about helping your neighbors and accepting help when you needed it, about the transformative power of love found in unexpected places. But most of all, it was a story about two people who faced impossible odds and chose to face them together, building something beautiful from the ashes of loss and the dust of drought. And in the end, that was all any love story needed to be. Two people, a shared dream, and the determination to see it through no matter what challenges arose. Sarah and Cole had that in abundance, and it carried them through a lifetime of joy and sorrow, triumph and tragedy, until they stood together at the end, looking back on a life well lived and a love well earned. The wheat still grew in Miller's Valley, golden and tall. The cattle still grazed on the hillsides, fat and healthy. The mountains still stood eternal guard over the land below. And somewhere in the fabric of that place, woven into the very soil and stone, the love between Sarah and Cole endured, a permanent part of the valley they had helped to build, a testament to what was possible when two people chose to face the world together. Their great-great-grandchildren still work the land today, carrying on traditions established more than a century ago. They know the stories, cherish the legacy, and understand that the prosperity they enjoy was built on the foundation of hard work, sacrifice, and a love that refused to give up even when times were darkest. And when they stand in those wheat fields at sunset, feeling the warm breeze and watching the mountains turn purple in the fading light, they remember the words that Cole Garrett once spoke to Sarah Hendricks on a desperate autumn day when the future looked bleak and impossible. This valley is better with you in it. It was true then, and it remains true now, a simple acknowledgement of the profound impact one person can have on a place, on a community, on another person's life. Sarah brought strength and determination to Miller's Valley. Cole brought kindness and steadfast support. Together they brought love, family, and hope that sustained not just themselves but everyone around them. The wheat continues to grow. The cattle continue to graze. The mountains continue to stand. And the love story of Sarah and Cole continues to inspire, reminding each new generation that even in the hardest times, in the wildest places, love can take root and flourish if you are brave enough to accept help, strong enough to offer it, and wise enough to recognize that the best things in life are built together, one day, one harvest, one moment of connection at a time. Miller's Valley is better because they were in it. And their descendants understand that they carry a responsibility to honor that legacy, to help their neighbors, to build community, to love fiercely and work hard and never give up even when the odds seem impossible. That is the true inheritance Sarah and Cole left behind, worth more than land or cattle or any material wealth. They left a roadmap for how to build a life worth living, and their family follows it still. The sun sets over Montana territory one more time, painting the valley in shades of gold and crimson and purple. The wheat sways in the evening breeze, the cattle low softly in the gathering darkness, and if you listen carefully, you might hear the echo of laughter, of two voices raised in conversation, of promises made and kept over the course of a lifetime. That is the music of Miller's Valley, the sound of love enduring, and it plays on into the night, into the future, into forever.